Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name's Kyle, and for today's video, I thought we would talk about a very basic tool, however, a tool that is of the utmost importance when out on site, and that is a tape measure. So I've got some tips and tricks and maybe some hacks that you don't know about a tape measure, as well as a couple cool parlor tricks that you might be able to show your friends and impress them. We'll do those at the end, but let's go ahead and get into it. So no doubt in my mind, if you're watching this video, there's a good chance, and I would assume everybody knows what a tape measure is. However, it is a spring-loaded long metal strip with numbers on it. Some tape measure manufacturers, they put the numbers on both sides, which is nice because not always are you looking at the top of your tape measure. However, all tape measures are going to have that measuring system. I am American, supposedly behind the rest of the world, and we still use imperial, which means inches and feet, not metric. If you're metric, my guess is a lot of these tips will still apply. However, they will be a little bit different. You know, you'll see that most tape measures, actually all tape measures, unless it's like a folding rule tape measure, has a nice tip on the end, and you'll see here those tips can be either quite large, like this Stanley Fat Max Extreme, or we've got this Stanley Power Lock, which I don't know if it'll focus exactly on that guy there, but if it does, you'll notice that it is quite tiny. Now you may be asking, like, what is the difference and why do I need either a big tip or a small tip? So usually it is because of this right here. You see those big tips that go to the top of this Fat Max Extreme? Personally, for me, it's because when I'm reaching out, a lot of times the tape is stronger like this, where the flex of the tape is crowned up like a smile. If you turn your tape measure into a frown, it doesn't stand up worth a darn. Let's say if I was trying to measure way back here, and I wanted to get a dimension to this mezzanine, I can reach out. I'm at an angle, so that makes it a little bit more difficult, but I can hook things with my top, and you can't do that with a tape measure without a top hook. But the advantage is smaller, more nimble. You can get it into tighter spaces that specifically you can't do with this sort of a tip. Now we got off track just a little bit. Let's go back to talking about the tape measure. Now every tape measure looks a little bit different, but most of the time you're going to have these marks here that say each stud layout, which is usually marked in red, so 16, 32, 48, so on and so forth. And that's because a standard wall layout is a 16-inch stud spacing. There are other dimensions that a lot of people don't know, and I personally have never used them because I've just never framed that way. But there is a diamond here for 19 3/16, 38 3/8, and so on and so forth. And what that is a perfect layout with 8 foot. If you're going to be sheathing something like a roof or a floor deck, and you're using an engineered material, or just you don't want to go 2 foot on center with a roof deck, but maybe you don't need to go 16 inches on center, you can do the 19 3/16 spacing, and it works out perfectly for 8 foot sheet good. Maybe you didn't know that, but I know it didn't dawn on me for a long time because I just never been taught it, nor had I ever had a need for it. I just usually frame 16 on center or 2 foot on center. Okay, now let's also look at the tape measure tip. Now, every tip is just a little bit different, but they all act the same way. And it's because with a tape measure, you're using it to be accurate. Now, if this tape measure, you'll notice the tip moves and it goes back and forth, and it's moving at the exact dimension of the thickness of the tip. And the reason it does that is because depending on if you are pushing your tape measure into a material to measure, or if you are hooking, it has to change in order to reflect that accurate dimension when you measure. So for instance, if I'm pulling on this plywood and I'm checking the dimension of it, it's 35 inches and 7/8. Now, if I were to be butting into a wall and the tape measure didn't move, it's gonna be 35 and 7/8, plus the dimension of the tip. So if you always wondered why your tape measure was loose like that, that is the point. Now, another feature of a tape measure that they all have is this little locking mechanism, and pretty self-explanatory. You can put your tape out to whatever dimension you want and you can lock it. For the most part, I don't do that because I just kind of stick my finger underneath. This Milwaukee's kind of nice because it's got a spot in the ergonomic gripping of it where you can just put your finger underneath and it will lock the tape measure in. A lot of times what I do is I'm measuring out long distances and I'm by myself, so I like to just go ahead and I'll lay out the tape on top of whatever I'm marking, lock it down, and then that way it will stay put where I'm at and I can make my marks. Now let's talk about another feature that a lot of people do not know, and I know a lot of you do know because you're professional. However, for those of you that are maybe just starting, each tape measure has a dimension on it written somewhere. So if you look right there, it tells me 3 inches. Now what that means is that this tape measure is 3 inches wide. So what you use that for is I'm gonna use this sawhorse set as a representation of, let's say you're working inside of a room and you wanna get the interior dimension. Now, sometimes it's okay. You can just take your tape measure, stick it inside, bend it as tight as you can into the corner, and experience is gonna tell you how to read that tape measure right there. However, if you wanna be as accurate as possible, take your tape, butt it all the way in to the back. Now you've got a 3-inch tape measure, and you can read right here, it's 26 1/16. So I would have thought that that was a 29-inch dimension, and that has to do with curving your tape in here, and most likely 29 is gonna be okay. But if you're looking for that exact dimension, you take 26 1/16 and you add 3 inches to it. So that's something that a lot of people didn't know, but your tape measure tells you what the dimension is so that you can stick it against something and get an accurate measurement on an inside dimension. On the end of your tape measure, not all tape measures, but if you don't have this on your tape measure, I'd recommend getting a new one. You will see a nice knockout there. You see that little slit in the end of your tape measure? And what that is for is when you're by yourself and you don't have anything to hook your tape measure on, but you got to get a dimension. So for us, a lot of times when we're laying out our steel on a wall, we're going, let's say 64 foot down a wall, I've only got the end to hook. So when I'm at the end and I hook my end and I start marking out where my steel panels are, I get to a point where, I mean, this tape measure is only 25 foot long. If I got to measure 64 foot worth, I'm going to mark out as far as I can, and then I'm going to set a nail. And once I set the nail, that little slit is going to be able to lock on perfectly to that little nail head, and then you can keep measuring. I always use the tip of my tape measure. It does make a big difference when you know that you have that ability. I'm setting nails all the time for some quick measurements. So here's something that a lot of people don't even maybe think of. When you have your numbers, most tape measures are made to read left to right, just like you would read a book. So when you measure out, you're starting at the left and you're measuring, dimensionally 1 through whatever the number is. If you're kind of like me, I always like to, grab my tape out of my left side of my pouch, which is where it is. My pencil is in my right hand, and it's more natural to just measure out to my right and make a mark than it is to grab it, use my right hand still to pull the tape out, make a mark, then I have to switch hands and I have to mark my dimension. The problem is when you do it the way that I want to do it with 99% of all tape, I know they make tapes that are opposite. You're pulling it from the opposite way, which means you're starting from down there, counting this way now, and my brain, it just doesn't always think about this. Let's say I'm marking 67 inches and I want to go 67 1/4. Yes, I know that I need to go to the left, which is counterintuitive because typically you're moving to your right. That's how we've been taught to read left to right. And you always got to make sure that depending on the way your tape measure is, that you don't just blindly mark 1/4 inch to the right of your 67, because that would be 66 3/4, not 67 1/4. Just a simple tip, I make those sorts of mistakes all the time because I get in a hurry. Sometimes I'm measuring this way and sometimes I flip it and I don't think about it. I just look at the number and go to the right or to the left, depending on if it's a minus or positive from that number, if that makes sense. I always say that you should always check your tape measures to make sure that they're accurate. And if you're on site with more than one guy and more than one tape measure, this is definitely important. You don't have to have a perfect tape measure. You just have to be consistent across the board between you and the guys that you're working with, because as you can see right here, between the Milwaukee, the Stanley, and the Crescent Shock Force, none of them are actually the same. So what we're gonna do is, I've got a spot here and I'm just gonna go ahead and mark 16 inches. And what you should do is, if you're working with other people, you should do this sort of thing. I just made a 16-inch mark, and now I'm gonna go ahead and check it with another tape measure. And you'll notice that right away, I'm almost a full 1/16 of an inch from 16 inches. And you can do that with multiple tape measures. Look at that, 1/16 of an inch, 1/16 of an inch. Now what that means is that this old Stanley is inaccurate. Now, it doesn't really matter if you're working by yourself and this is your tape measure. However, if you're doing a job and you're going back and forth from different areas, let's say you leave this on your miter saw cut station, you use it to make all of your cuts right on your miter saw, and man, I think I'm perfect at 16 inches. However, I've got this Crescent Lufkin sitting in my tool pouch, and this is what I'm using to measure over on the job site somewhere, and I go ahead and get 16 inches, and I'm almost a 1/16 of an inch off. That's not good. Let's say you're working with multiple people, and somebody on the job site has this tape measure, and they just happen to be either the cut man or the guy calling out dimensions and installing. That's gonna make a difference. Is it gonna matter in rough framing? Probably not. But it's very simple and easy to do, to just check and make sure that everybody on the team is using a tape measure that is consistent. They don't have to be the same, they just gotta be consistent. Okay, so this next tip here is a kind of a rough framing tip. Let's say you wanna make a cut on this piece of plywood, and someone calls out that they need a nice, I don't know, let's say a 4-inch rip for whatever reason. You can take your speed square, and you can use, if you've got these nice notches, you can use those to very quickly make a nice accurate 4-inch rip on your material. Well, you can do the same thing with just a tape measure. Let's say I'm gonna go 5 inches this time. You take your finger here, you lock it on to your material, and then you're going to push it right on the edge of your tape measure here, and you can do the same thing. You're not gonna be as confident or as precise with this, but if you're doing rough framing and a guy up on the roof is calling for a 5-inch piece, I don't know why you do that, but let's just assume, you can do that and make your quick cut. All right, here's one that I wouldn't probably recommend often, but if you're in a pinch and you really need a nice circle, what you can do is you can put that nail, drive that in where you want your center of your circle to be, and you can use that hook on the end of your tape measure, and let's say you want a 24-inch circle diameter. You're gonna go to 12 inches. Like I said, this isn't perfect. But I think you get the idea. You can make a nice perfect circle with a little bit of time and effort if you've got that hook tip that I was talking about earlier. Okay, for this tip here, let's say I don't have my pencil and I wanna make a quick mark on this plywood. I can use my finger once again to, let's say I'm going 20 inches. I'm gonna put it over here to my side at 20 inches, and I can use the edge of the tape to make a quick mark, and that's gonna allow me to at least do something. Maybe it's just a reference point and I don't want to pull out my pencil. You don't always have to do that, and you can do the same trick if you're trying to scribe. I can do what we did with the mark, but only not using a pencil. See? And I just made a nice 2-foot line off of my material. I don't particularly like that feature as much, but I can promise you I've done it when I didn't have my pencil handy and I was up somewhere. I just maybe held my dimension where I wanted it, made a quick tick mark, and at least I know what I'm doing. All right, so I've got a couple parlor tricks that you can definitely use to impress people. And I got Cole here. Cole's my son. He came out to see what I was doing out in the shop. And I thought, perfect, Cole, I'm gonna show you a couple tricks. Now, do you know how to add and subtract fractions?
Depends.
Okay, but you could do it, but it's a little tricky, right?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna show you a cool trick with a tape measure that you can bring to class and then show your math teacher and be like, hey, I'm gonna show you this cool trick, and he's gonna be amazed. I'm gonna go 9 foot 3 inch, 9 foot 3 and 7/8. Okay, it's kind of a confusing number right away, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna find 9 foot 3 and 7/8. Now, I'm gonna put my other end at 9 foot 3, 7/8. Now, give me another number smaller than 9 foot 3 and 7/8.
3 1/4.
Okay, so now 3 1/4, you find 3 foot 1/4 of an inch on the other side of my tape. What was your first number? 9 foot 3 and 7/8?
Yeah.
Okay, so now go find 3 foot and 1/4, you said?
Yep. Right here.
And what does the tape measure read on the other side? 75.
6 feet.
6 foot 3,
3
5/8.
5/8.
So 6 foot 3 and 5/8 is your answer when you take 9 foot 3 and 7/8 minus 3 foot and 1/4. So you don't have to do this math in your head. You can very quickly, look at this, 8 foot, right? 8 foot minus, just give me a number.
3 foot.
8 foot minus 3 foot, that's super easy. Where do they, wait, I'm not holding it right. Where do they line up?
5 feet.
5 feet. Boom. Simple math, all with a tape measure. And I got another trick, and this one's even cooler, okay? If you don't know how old your old man is and you don't remember, or if you're like me and people say, how old are you? And you say, you know, that's something I haven't really thought about. I don't remember my age. Guess what you do? You take your tape measure out. So it's 2020. You can do this whatever year you end up watching this video in. And let's say it was 1999, we would go to 99 inches. Therefore, in 2020, we're gonna go to 120 inches. Now this is the same thing. We're gonna take the tape measure. We're gonna go all the way down to 120 inches. I was born in what year?
84?
83, okay? So go find 83 on my tape measure.
Right there.
And how old am I?
37.
37.
Almost.
Yeah, because this really only works at the end of the year. You gotta wait till the year has gone by because obviously we're still in 2020 and I'm not 37 yet. How old are you? You were born in 2007?
7, yep.
You're gonna be 13.
Yep.
So there you go, that's another little trick. So you'll have to take a tape measure into school and ask your teacher when they were born. Now, don't do this to the female teachers because they don't want you to know how old they are, but it's a good trick and it's really just a parlor trick. I think the mathematical one, when you want to do subtractions and find a quick way to, you know, take 1 foot 1 and 7/8 away from 9 foot, you can just line those things up. Pretty cool trick, huh?
Yeah.
Awesome. Maybe you already knew every one of these tips and maybe you didn't. Hopefully it helped you with at least something or got you kind of thinking about other ways to use your tape measure. And if nothing else, maybe it was just a good time waste for you to watch the video. Regardless, those are some of the things I've learned with my tape measure, things that I've learned from others, obviously, and things that I've just picked up on the job site. However, if you've got a great tip that I'm missing, something that I should be doing with my tape measure, make sure you drop that down below in the comments. I do read them and I do answer questions that I can, so if you got one, drop that as well. Otherwise, smash the like button if you enjoyed the content, and if you aren't already, hit the subscribe button. I'm gonna go ahead and get out of here, so I appreciate you guys hanging out. We'll catch you on the next video. Later.